Well, hello and welcome everyone to our class, The Secrets of Procrastination, Why We Do It, and How to Stop. So I was lucky enough this time to get some video footage of our live class, and I thought it would be really interesting for you to get a flavor of that. So what I've done is merge that in with the PowerPoint, and you're going to get a little bit of a back and forth feel to it. So you might see some differences in volume. You might hear some slight differences in what I say in the class versus what I say online. I think for the most part, you're going to really enjoy it and get a good sense of what the concepts are. If you have any questions, or if you're a detail-oriented person and some of the things that we say a little bit differently in the class versus on the PowerPoint confuse you, just feel free to send me an email and I would be happy to clear it up for you. I think you're going to really enjoy getting a chance to kind of hear and feel what the actual live classroom experience was. So I'm excited to share it with you. But first, let me share in our PowerPoint slide a little bit of what took a long time to do in the class, so we're not wasting a lot of time. So in the beginning of the class, I did some facilitation, and what I did is I asked the class for a list of examples of when we procrastinate, and we came up with all sorts of things together: working on high-stakes projects, getting rid of clutter, starting an overwhelming, complicated project, making outreach calls. And there were so many different examples, and what you'll notice when I start the video is we'll already have that list of examples on the whiteboard. But the most important thing for you is that I'd like you to go through the process as well. So I would like you to take out some paper and write down a couple of areas in your life where you tend to procrastinate, and make sure that they're areas where you'd rather not be procrastinating, because sometimes when you procrastinate, you may be just fine about it. And we'll talk about that more in a live class. The other thing I did is I compiled a list of why we procrastinate. So instead of just saying, well, gosh, I procrastinate because I'm lazy, really think about what it is that holds you back when you think about taking an action yet don't take that action, and what is that inner conflict all about. And again, I composed a great list, and you'll see some of these things come up in our discussion. What I want you to do is pick one of your procrastination areas and write down what you think your procrastination is protecting you from. So typically, and this is a little sneak preview, it's protecting you from some kind of emotion or feeling that you don't want to experience, usually. And we'll talk about that more in class. So with that, I'm going to transition to the video. You may hear volume differences, as I said, but please be patient with that. And I will come back again a couple of times with a clarification of a model on the PowerPoint slide, just to give you some continuity and clarity.
So again, we might come up with more. But I want to share something that I absolutely believe is 100% true about procrastination and many other negative behavior patterns, and that is that we never do anything that we don't believe serves us in some way. So every single action or behavior pattern or family of behaviors serves us in some way, at least in our brain, right? At least we believe it serves us some way. So if we're going to figure out how to not procrastinate as much, what we need to figure out is how is procrastinating serving us? So that's the thing to think about. And typically when you have what I'm going to call a negative behavior pattern, so a behavior pattern that you don't like very much, you don't feel is very effective in the world, usually it's some version of self-protection. So our self-protection mechanisms are more primitive in our brain, they're more emotional, and they're less thought out. So if you think about like a lion in a cage, when a lion goes into self-protection, what does the lion do? Roar, growl, right? So, I mean, technically that's not helping the lion, because all the keepers are now constraining the lion even more, but the lion doesn't know that, right? It's just kind of a primitive response. And it's the same with us. So typically when we engage in procrastination or anything else that is frustrating, because it's like I want that, we have that conflict. I want to be doing X, but I'm not doing it, I'm not doing it, I'm not doing it. Now, if you're procrastinating intentionally, and you want to procrastinate, and it's an effective work technique. So for example, some people said deadline pressure, right? So I work better under deadline. I am very confident that I'll get the project done. I want to wait till the last minute and do it. I have fun when I wait till the last minute and doing it, and it doesn't bother me at all. Then there's no problem there. There's only a problem when you're like, darn, I'm procrastinating, and I really don't want to procrastinate because it's really kind of putting a dent into my life. So that's when we want to change it. So when you have that situation, the first thing you have to find out, and this is sort of the first big thing I would like you to write down, is how is it serving me? And a better question that might make it easier to find the answer is, how is it protecting me? So we've already identified a couple of things. So procrastination, we have an action that we're considering taking. This looks like it's going to die, so I'm using that one. We have an action that we're considering taking, but we're not doing it. And I'm going to say negative experience. So typically, whatever the action is that we're thinking of doing is connected to some sort of negative experience. And so we have a choice in our behavior to either act or do it at some unknown point in the future. So to act or not act right now and just postpone it for later. And if that action is exciting and it outweighs the idea of what will happen if we don't act, then we'll probably act. So let's think of some examples where you don't procrastinate.
Routines, like when you make a brushing teeth in the morning.
Okay.
There's no procrastination, it's just...
You just do it, right? That's such a great example.
Self-care.
Routines, basic routines that you've been doing for years, right? We just do them. We don't think about them. Why is that?
There is no risk.
Yeah. There's no reason. So, I mean...
Well, there is a long-term reason. If you don't do things like brush your teeth or remove your makeup, you can get really bad skin or you can get cavities. But it's a different, it's a disconnected reason.
Right. So, I mean, I think if you weren't used to brushing your teeth, I mean, like kids, right? A lot of them don't like brushing their teeth. But then you go to the dentist and you're like, oh, you better brush your teeth, then it won't hurt so much when you're at the dentist or something like that. Then you're like, oh, I better brush my teeth. And in the beginning, it might just take a while. Like, I had somebody give an example of flossing teeth, right? A lot of people don't like to floss, and it takes time, and it's sort of boring, and so they won't floss, but then they go to the dentist and they have one of those dental experiences where it's like, okay, I better floss the rest of my life. And then it takes a while, but eventually they get into a routine with it. So what does a routine do? The negative experience in that case is it takes energy. It takes time, it takes energy, it's not very interesting, it's kind of boring, but mainly it just takes energy. I have to do it. But when you establish routines, they become more and more automatic to the point where they take no energy. So you're basically changing, so if we look at a set of scales here, let's see, how do you make a nice little scale then? So here are two scales where we're weighing the outcome, is it worth it or not? Is it worth my energy to brush my teeth or floss my teeth? Well, when I don't have a habit made out of it and I don't have any recent shocking reprimands from my dentist, then maybe maybe it's not worth it. Maybe I'd rather just play video games for a little while longer, right? Just, take a real quick minute to do the quick brush. But now I've had the reprimand from the dentist and I've been establishing a routine. It doesn't really take long to floss my teeth. Now I don't have to pay as much to do it. So it's always kind of a balancing act. So typically the negative experience that we're protecting ourselves has something to do with the energy that we have to put in. So Brandy was talking about going into the unknown, right? going out of my comfort zone. So how much energy does it take you to do something in your comfort zone versus out of your comfort zone?
Yeah.
A lot, right? So in that case, you're protecting yourself from energy drain. Is that smart to do as a human organism? Absolutely. We only have a limited amount of energy every day, so we have to protect ourselves from energy drain, right? We have to take naps, we have to eat, get more energy in, and if we're too tired, we just can't function anymore. So we have to protect ourselves. So obviously we're wired to protect ourselves from energy drain. So we're not going to do things that take a lot of energy without giving us a big thing in return. So sometimes these long, boring projects with lots of complex parts, you know, what we tend to do is we get a dopamine hit when we complete something. That's kind of fun, and often that's worth it. But if that hit of completion isn't going to come until after hours and hours of boring, tedious work, then it might not feel worth it in the short term.
Mm-hmm.
But that's what you have to figure out. Now, with the outreach, so again, what comes up a lot when I talk about procrastination is people trying to get their businesses off the ground, trying to get sales initiatives off the ground. And they keep saying that they want to get out and make calls or meet people in their network or, you know, pitch the product, but they keep procrastinating on that, right? Or they're in job transition, as the example came up, and they keep saying, well, I got to go out and canvas for companies. Or I've had people in here that are like, I have to go information interview. I have to go do all this stuff. And they're great ideas. They all make sense. If they're done, the outcome of the job search is going to be different. So logically, it makes complete sense to do all this stuff. But they still don't do it. Exercise. A lot of people procrastinate on exercise. Again, until you get into a routine. So we've got the consummate exercisers who have been exercising their whole life, who love it, and just who have different exercise routines. The energy equations, they've already experienced all the endorphin hits from having a great workout. They love it. They don't ever procrastinate on exercising because it's fun for them. And then there's the people that really don't enjoy exercise that much. It's a lot of effort to get in there and exercise, and they don't get a lot of endorphins. They just get tired, and then, you know, there's a completely different equation there. So I'd like you to each think and pick something that you procrastinate on that actually bugs you. I'm going to start with outreach because that's so common, but then we'll go to each one of yours, all right? So let's use outreach. Okay, so outreach is I'm preparing to go and reach out to customers or potential customers, and so I get all my notes ready, but I don't actually make the calls and make the pitches, right? So the action would be to call potential customers, and what's the negative experience that we associate with that?
Rejection.
Rejection. Is that what you would say it is too?
Yeah.
Yeah, rejection. Okay. All right. Why would we want to protect ourselves from rejection?
Because it depletes our energy and we can't move forward.
Okay. It depletes our energy,
Self-esteem.
kind of hits our self-esteem. So, a lot of what I'm going to bring up here is pain. When we're protecting ourselves in a pure physiological sense, we're protecting ourselves from pain. So rejection often isn't physical pain unless they actually hit you with something, you know, get away from this, you're knocking on the door and they've got a bat, you know, kind of get out of here. So, you know, unless they punch you or hit you, usually rejection's not physical pain, right? But there is a psychological pain to it, right? And we talked energy drain, you said depletion.
Yeah, it could be not being liked, not feeling appreciated. Those are also pains.
Not being liked,
Or worthy.
that worthy, valued.
Mm-hmm.
Anyone want to add anything? So it's not necessarily the rejection itself that causes the pain. It's what the rejection means. Right?
Is it what it feels like or what it means? Like,
Good question. So what it means leads to what it feels like. And I'll give you an example, okay? I don't know if I have any more room to put it up here, but let's take two salespeople, salesperson A and salesperson B. Salesperson A is a very awkward salesperson. A stands for awkward. This is how I have to remember it. And they are very worried about making quota. And they know they have to make the calls. They struggle to make the calls, but they make the calls, right? And when they get rejected, they start thinking, oh my gosh, I'm not going to make quota. I'm going to get fired from my job. I'm not going to be able to feed the kids. I'm going to start, they start thinking about all of that, right? And so the feeling is, what can you imagine? Like the sinking, this sinking just pit in your stomach or something like that, right? Let's talk about salesperson B. All right, salesperson B is the best salesperson. Starts with B. Salesperson B has been selling for a long time. He is super confident. He has a sales system. It's a process. And he believes in his product. That starts with B too. He believes in his product. And he knows that a lot of people are going to be a good fit for it, and a lot of people aren't going to be a good fit for it. And it's his job to keep calling people till he finds the one that are the best fit. So when he calls people and he gets rejected, it means something a little different than him, doesn't it? To him, doesn't it? Mm-hmm. To him, it means, okay, this person's not a good fit for my product, but wow, this person was a really interesting person to get to know. Maybe they might refer me business at some point. Let me build that relationship and get to know them and put them in my database. Who knows? Maybe we can help each other out sometime. Okay, great. On to the next one. Okay, great. On to the next one. Right? Very different experience. But he got rejected too. Right? So it's not the actual rejection that causes the psychological pain. And it's not an automatic feeling that rejection causes. Feels like, I want to just put crap here. Feels horrible, right? It's what we attribute it to. And that, by the way, is one of our anecdotes, okay? So our anecdote to procrastination is not to beat ourselves up for procrastinating. It's really to acknowledge ourselves. We're procrastinating for a good reason. We're protecting ourselves from all of this. Okay, now who wouldn't protect themselves from that pit in the stomach and just the not being liked, not being worthy, not being valued? I mean, what smart person wouldn't protect themselves from that? I mean, it's kind of silly not to protect yourself from horrible feelings that deplete you and drain you. So it's actually very smart for you to protect yourself. But it's unlikely that you're going to do this action. And here's where we get the dichotomy, right? Because there's also a reason to do the action. And so what we want to do here, and I'm going to erase this so I can add another little. So again, I'm just going to make this really simple, and I'm going to call it make calls. Make calls, all right? All right, so this is to act, and this is to not act, right? So if I make calls and I act on that, what's the benefit?
You get a sale,
Yeah, I'm going to maybe
or at least progress.
make some more money, be more successful, et cetera, et cetera. If I don't act, what's the result?
failure.
Yeah, so most of us will say failure, and because that's what we're doing in our head. We're trying to get ourselves to act. But now what I want you to do is a little paradigm shift. I want you to think about what we just talked about, okay? Think about how smart we are protecting ourselves from psychological pain, right? So what is the value of not acting?
Not being rejected.
Not being rejected, which means not feeling horrible, right? So don't get depleted. And I'm going to put sick to stomach. And that's not what everybody will experience, but just in our example, we're going to say that that's the experience, okay? So now we have a smarter equation. It's not this big, there's a conflict inside us, but this is the real conflict. It's not the conflict of, oh, I'm a good person, I'm a productive person, I'm a successful person, or I'm a lazy person, you know, I just don't have ambition, the kind of things that we say to ourselves in our head. I see some smiles here. The things that we say to our head, if I don't act, if I'm over here, then that just means, so that's even more stuff, right? But, so I've got this versus this. And if you're procrastinating, then your very smart brain and body has come to the conclusion that this is not worth this. Simple as that. And what most people do when they procrastinate is they never really think about the positive intention behind their procrastination, so they never really understand what they're trying to protect themselves from. And because they never really understand the positive thing they're trying to protect themselves on, they really can't bring the conflict as it stands to the surface. What they're really doing is they're just trying to tell themselves that this is good and this is bad. They're fighting with themselves, they're beating themselves up, and then at a very subconscious level, the self-protection mechanisms kick into gear, and what you get is what many of us call our inner self-saboteur, or our inner rebel, and it gets stronger and stronger and stronger, because the more this side yells, the more this side has to yell back. So we have that conflict. So the goal, or the tool that we use, the first tool that we use to combat procrastination is really look for and understand the positive intention behind our procrastination. So what's the positive thing that I am protecting myself from? What am I protecting myself from? Because usually your positive intention when you procrastinate is that you're trying to protect yourself from some negative feelings or negative experiences that feel like psychological pain. Make sense? All right. So now we've said, okay, well, it makes sense, but I still want to stop procrastinating. I really do want to get this done, right? I want to be successful. So I understand it, but I want to get beyond it. So what do we have to do to get beyond it? We have to change the equation. We have to make this worth this. And there's two ways to do this. One way is to make this more compelling, and one way is to make this less painful. So deadline pressure. Deadline pressure makes this more compelling. That's why people like deadline pressure. Because if I'm on deadline now, the stakes get higher and higher and higher for me to not do this, right? Mm-hmm. And so they basically make the pain associated with not acting. Okay, so now we have some protection here, but now there's pain associated with not acting. So this becomes more compelling because not acting has a huge consequence. I'm going to fail the class, whatever else. Okay, so that's what the deadline pressure is about. But I prefer the other formula because this formula also includes a lot of adrenaline and a lot of fear-based action. So it's not really fun for me, especially if I'm nervous at the last minute, to be doing things really quickly at the last minute. And I don't always put out my best product. Well, sometimes I kind of do. So when I've got a little bit of adrenaline going, but if you've got too much adrenaline going, you're just trying to get it all done. You're usually not doing your best job, et cetera, et cetera. All right, so let's look at how do we take some of this stuff that we're protecting ourselves and make it less painful, right? So we'll start with the pain of rejection. Any questions?
So here is the model that we talked about where I used the scales, and I talked about how our actions that we're considering taking that we happen to procrastinate on tend to be associated with a negative experience. And this negative experience being attached to the action makes us not want to take the action. And so what our goal is to really understand what the negative experience is that's connected to the action and how to break it apart. So how to make the action not connected to the negative experience, or at least to make the negative experience less negative. And so when we talk about the scales, and you'll notice in the video I was kind of going back and forth, but when we talk about the scales, if we say that the scale that's weighted down a little bit more is the one that wins when we're making a choice whether to act or not to act, the things that tend to move these scales on the action side are as the rewards of acting increase and the consequences of not acting also increase. So that's why people respond to deadline pressure, because as the consequences of not acting go up, it makes us want to act more. So if I'm going to fail a test or get fired from my job for not doing a project, I'm going to be much more likely to overcome all the pain of doing that action just because there's a huge consequence. So no matter how much psychological pain there is, I will overcome that if there's a worse consequence. So that's when I'll act, but that's a really very stressful way of acting. So what I prefer to do is to change the balance in the scales by making the desire not to act less compelling, by making the consequences of acting that are psychological less. And so the tools that we're giving you in this class are all about how do I take the negative experience that's related to acting that's making me want to not act and make it less.
We already talked, so I'm going to say pain of rejection. I'm going to share a different tool with you. So we already talked about how the pain of rejection has something to do with how we interpret it, right? So we have salesperson A that interprets rejection as, oh my gosh, I'm going to lose my livelihood and be out on the streets. And we have salesperson B that interprets rejection as, oh wow, this might be another great person to have in my network, and this is part of the process, this is one of 80% of the people that aren't a good fit for my product, so I'm just going to keep moving on until I find the ones that I do. So this is just part of my system, kind of like brushing or flossing my teeth. I just go through and I make 20 phone calls a day or whatever it is. So in that particular case, we sort of started this process, which is what I call the balloon model. And the reason we call it the balloon model is because when we do this with kids, the kids get to pop the balloon. So it's one of my favorite models, and a lot of my clients' favorite models too. But it's called changing what the painful thing means, right? Because remember, it's psychological pain, which really comes from your interpretation, not from the actual thing. I remember now, you've seen this before.
Have I? Oh, is that
This model, we did this, I just had this flashback to like 7, 10 maybe years ago when we did this model. So, so rejection, right? So I get rejected. All right? This is a fact, right? Someone says no to me, right? But the meaning is that we first come to is what do we want to say? I'm a loser, I'm a failure, I'm not worthy, let's do I'm not worthy. And we can do another one. So all these bubbles represent different ways that you can interpret this actual thing that's happening in the world. So this is the thing that's happening in the world, the facts that everybody could look at and see and say are the same thing. The bubbles are all the different ways that one could interpret the facts. If I'm sitting in this bubble, this means I'm not worthy. So I see this and I immediately, it's connected. They don't fall apart. But when you separate them, you actually say, oh, see that this is actually what happened, this is how I interpret it. This is the story I made up in my head about it. We talk about that a lot. And if I'm coaching you, I'm going to often ask you, what's the story you're making up in your head about it? Because that will help you make the separation if you're ever upset about it. Okay. So let's put salesperson A's interpretation in here, which is, oh my gosh, I'm going to die, right? I'm going to lose my livelihood and die, you know? Lose everything, be out on the street. And then let's put salesperson B's interpretation, which is new potential. All right. Now, we have enough bubbles up there. Or did I call it the balloons? We have enough balloons up there. So everyone is a way to think about rejection, right? And everyone causes a different feeling. So somebody pick one of these at random and tell me how you might feel if that were the truth. So let's say every time I get rejected, it means I'm not worthy. Let's say that's the truth. Every time I get rejected, it means I'm not worthy. How is that going to feel?
Bad.
Bad, right? So it's really going to be a good idea to procrastinate and not expose myself to rejection if that's what it means, right? Because it just makes me feel bad, 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 depleted, 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 right? So if this is the truth, I'm not going to continue to act anymore, right? But there's another thing that happens, and it's that each of these bubbles or balloons act like self-fulfilling prophecies. So if I get rejected and I believe, or it's the truth, that rejection means that I'm not worthy, could that play out as a self-fulfilling prophecy?
It's a belief system. Your mind, whatever you're telling yourself is turning into is a thought, and then that thought leads to an action. So you're going to take the actions that are going to support whatever that initial thinking was.
Right. And so what actions might I take to support I'm not worthy?
Stop calling.
Stop making calls, right? I'm not going to keep making calls. Maybe I'm going to crawl into bed and not do anything else the rest of the day because I feel so not worthy. So I'm not only going to not make calls, I'm not going to do anything else. I'm certainly not going to get to my clutter, right? Right? So I'm going to do very little. Do nothing. Feel like nothing, right? Because if I'm not worthy, I'm just nothing, right? And then, so this is what I'm going to maybe do as a result of these feelings, right? So I'm feeling bad. I used to do this whole chain. And that's why I looked at Brandy, because I'm like, oh, you're going to be, you heard this once before. I even remember the example we used. So I feel bad, and that leads to the behavior of doing nothing or feeling like nothing. And then the less I do, and the more I feel like nothing, the more evidence that's going to be in the world to prove that I'm not worthy. All right? Let's assume that this one's true. Let's assume that every time I procrastinate, I get more information and I'm just learning and getting smarter and smarter and smarter.
Every time you get rejected?
Every time I get rejected, it means that I'm getting more information and I'm learning and I'm getting smarter and smarter and smarter about this whole environment, this process. Well, how's that going to make me feel?
That would give me energy.
That would give me energy, right? Would it give you energy? Okay, so more energy.
Would make you feel prepared.
Mm-hmm. More energy, more confidence then. And so if I have more energy and more confidence, then how am I going to behave?
You keep doing it. You're just gonna keep
I'm going to do more. Do more, right? Do more. Act more. Because doing it gives me more energy. So now that's smart, right? I'm going to do more. And then if I do more, I'm going to keep getting more information and more learning. And I'm going to get better and better and better at it, right? So every balloon acts like a self-fulfilling prophecy. So what we do, once we've established this, and when we do it with kids, is we say, pop all the balloons you don't like and just keep the one you like. Because it doesn't matter what the balloon is, right? If you believe it, it will become a self-fulfilling prophecy. So one way to change the equation, so is it okay if I erase this now? One way to change the whole equation about to act or not to act is to change this, my interpretation of what is going to happen to me if I act that's negative. So I'm going to go back to my scales here. All right. So we have act, we have not act. And if I act, yeah, I'm going to make more money. But if I don't act, I will be protected from pain, protection from being not worthy. So I'm going to maintain my worth. I'm going to maintain what little sense of worth I have. And we are using extreme examples, but this is just to illustrate it. I'm maintaining what little worth I have by avoiding a situation that's going to deplete my worth. So not act wins, right? Not act wins. But now I'm going to go in and I'm going to change what that means. So if I get rejected now, if I get rejected, it doesn't mean that much. I'm just going to be learning. I'm going to learn more. And I'm going to get energy. So now there's very little reason to not act. And now this one wins. So the heavier one wins. Act. This is the clear winner. All right? So what I just shared with you is one tool you can use to change the procrastination equation. And it's really about honoring the little rebel inside you that's holding you back instead of, negative self-talking that thing to death. Because usually that part of you, that part of your brain that's advocating for you to procrastinate has a very good reason for doing so. It's trying to protect you from something psychologically painful, something that will deplete your energy, right?
So if we look at our balloon model, what we do first is we separate the facts, which is, in this case, I was rejected, with the meaning in our heads. And it's important to bring that up to our awareness because usually it happens in our subconscious and we're not thinking about it, we're just automatically reacting to it. But if you bring it up, you'll realize that in this case, in this example, one of the meanings is I'm a loser, I'm worthless, I'm unlovable, nobody wants me. So if I get rejected, that's what I think it means. But that isn't the only possible thing it means because this exists in my head. So another thing it could mean is I learned something about the market, I make a friend, and that's the example that we gave in class, or there could be several other meanings. And we use this model a lot in coaching to help people get less upset when they're upset, because usually when we're upset, it's the story in our head or the meaning in our head that's actually causing our upset. So I'll use this tool a lot with my clients in various situations, including this situation, which is helping someone feel less upset about being rejected, okay? And the model that we talked about in the class is how each of these balloons are important. I call them balloons because you can pop the ones that you don't like, and the reason you can pop the ones that you don't like is because every balloon works like a self-fulfilling prophecy, and this is how it works. So if I think that I'm a loser and I'm worthless, if I'm rejected, then I feel sad, disappointed, hurt, crushed. Those are all very draining and horrible feelings that we do not want to experience again. So typically, the resulting behavior is that we're not going to repeat the behavior. We're not going to reach out again. We might withdraw, hide from the world. And as a result of withdrawing and hiding from the world, we're going to have fewer interactions. We might feel more awkward in our reactions, which gives the person that we're interacting with weird energy from us that they can't interpret, which might make them a little bit more awkward in their interactions with us, which might make them avoid us, which then kind of makes it harder for us to have successful conversations, which reinforces our idea that we're a loser, worthless, unlovable, etc. Then we took a positive interpretation of the exact same situation where I reached out and I was rejected. And we said, well, what if my interaction was every time I'm rejected, I learn something about the market and I make a friend and I get to know somebody better. And if that's my story, then the feeling that comes from that is a sense of progress, even though I'm getting rejected, because I'm learning something and I'm making a friend. And because I'm feeling a sense of progress, I will continue to act, because the behavior that comes from this, wow, I'm still progressing, is to continue to act. And then the result of that behavior is that I continue to get smarter. I continue to learn about my market. I continue to make new friends. And eventually I run into people who will buy my product from me, or who will accept me for a job, or who will want to be a friend, or who will want to date me, or who will want to be close to me. So even if I got completely dumped by someone I love and have been married to for years, and it was horrible, and they were cheating on me and everything, if I go out there and just start talking to people, and even if the first few people reject me, I keep talking to people and meeting people and learning about what makes people tick, then eventually I make enough new friends so I'm feeling loved again. And you can do this with kind of anything that happens that upsets you and any meaning. But this is kind of an overview of the model that we went over in the class.
Let's say that you do the balloon model, but you can only think of negative balloons. So when you're doing it yourself, you're usually so convinced that it's negative that it's really hard to come up with these positive versions of the balloon. So I'll be coaching somebody and I'll say, well, what else could it mean? What else could it mean? And they just keep coming up with different versions of all the bad things it could mean. And so I'm like, okay, can I play? And then I'll come up with alternative situations. But let's say you don't have a coach that's saying, hey, can I play? Could it mean this positive thing? Could it mean this positive thing? Often, if you get someone outside of your own head, they can come up with the positive balloons. But let's say you don't have access to someone outside of your head to come up with positive balloons. Then here are a couple tricks that help you come up with positive balloons. So one of them is think about people you admire. Okay, so we were talking about rejection. I want you to all think about someone who you have on a pedestal, who you just absolutely admire. I'm going to say Superman just to be funny. All right, so let's say Superman got rejected. What would that mean? Anyone want to venture a guess? What would it mean to you if Superman got rejected?
You just go try again.
Right. There's like no negative meaning we're assigning. We don't think Superman's not worthy just because he got rejected, right? So you take somebody you really admire and you imagine them in that situation, you imagine them getting rejected, and you'll realize that you cannot come up with the same negative meaning because you have so much admiration for that person that they could be in the worst scenario in their life getting beat up. I mean, let's say you have a politician that you really like. It's the election year that you really, really admire, but they don't get enough votes. Do you think the politician's suddenly a loser? If you really admire them, you think, oh, well, but at least you put your hat in there. That's a really hard thing to do, is try to get elected, right? You know, if you've got a friend that you really admire that's been out of work for a couple of years, do you think there's something wrong with them and they're a loser? Usually you think, wow, you know, they're really smart, they're really together, they're really organized, and it's a really hard job market right now. You don't attribute it to who they are, okay? So that's one secret to getting more positive balloons, is imagining someone that you really, really admire in that same situation, right? So another one is a role reversal exercise. So what you do is you think about times when you were the person that did the rejecting, okay? And if you were the person that did the rejecting, then why did you reject? And so I'm going to think about, so I'd like all of you to think about the last person you rejected or the last couple people you rejected. And why did you reject them? Did you reject them because they weren't worthy? I mean, I can tell you in my place, I didn't reject them because they weren't worthy. I rejected them because I didn't really decide that I want to invest my money in that product at that time. And I actually appreciated learning about the product,
Yeah, so,
and I actually appreciated the person,
yeah.
but I just wasn't ready to invest yet. I see a lot of nods, so probably very similar, right? Okay, so that's the second trick. Okay, this is what we're gonna do next. Because we're on video, what I wanna do is jump down to our 7-step get into action plan. But then when we're done, we'll turn off the video and we will talk about some of the other examples people brought up. But we'll have just a more casual discussion about it, okay? So the 7-step get into action tool. You wanna write this down? All right, number 1, notice when you're procrastinating. And notice doesn't mean beat yourself up for it. It just means notice and say to yourself, I'm procrastinating right now. Isn't that interesting? And isn't that interesting? Because it is interesting, because you're just about to learn something about yourself. Isn't that interesting? And write it down. It's better if you can write it down, because I have people do logs all the time, and when you write, you begin to see patterns, and those yield, you know, more insight into what's really going on inside your head, deeper than you normally are conscious of.
That's why I procrastinate on my log.
Ah, well, you could procrastinate on your log, and then you would say, wow, I'm procrastinating on my log. Isn't that interesting? Because a lot of people procrastinate on their log because they're afraid of what they might find.
Exactly, I don't want to know what's in my head.
I don't really want to know what's deep down in there. But I can, on that note, I can promise you that everybody that has done the deeper work, every time they go a layer deeper and they get an insight, what they always feel is relief. I have never seen anybody go, oh my gosh, I see a dark demon down there. It's not dark demons that you find, it's, wow, I finally resolved an inner conflict. I get to be more myself now.
Yeah.
And it's really cool. Okay. Acknowledge the positive intention behind the procrastination. So ask yourself, what am I protecting myself from? What am I protecting myself from? Okay? Number 3, recognize. So now we're going into negotiating. Recognize the internal conflict. Recognize conflict. And commit to honoring, I'm going to say honoring or protecting both interests. I'm writing in shorthand right now because I don't want to keep turning my back on you. So the idea is you're bringing the voice of the rebel, or the voice of the self-saboteur, or the voice that's behind protecting yourself up to the surface, and you're committing to protecting it. So now we're not saying, well, I want to go out and make outreach calls, but I'm such a lazy, worthless, whatever, that I'm not doing it. Because that's really not honoring the self-protection in there. What you want to say instead is, well, I want to go out and make outreach calls, but I'm very nervous to do it, and I'm procrastinating because I want to protect myself from feeling bad. Right? And I feel bad because I think if I get rejected, it means this. So the more you can get specific about that, even better. Because then you can say, okay, I want to make our outreach calls, and this is our second tool. It's changing the but to an and. You can say, I want to make outreach calls, but I don't want to feel worthless from rejection. Right?
Yeah.
And sometimes I do an exercise where I actually have people say that out loud so you can hear it, but I'm just going to do it for you in the interest of time. So I want to make outreach calls, but I don't want to experience rejection and feel worthless. Or you can say, the other way around, I don't want to experience rejection and feel worthless, but I want to make outreach calls. So you can see the inner conflict when you say out loud the two things with a but in between. All right, so I want to make outreach calls so I can be successful in my business, but I don't want to be faced with rejection and end up feeling worthless. But I want to make outreach calls so I can be successful in my business. But I really don't want to have to deal with rejection because it's going to make me feel worthless. But, you know, and you just keep saying that back and forth and back and forth. And the reason you say that is because it makes the conflict very, very palpable. You really get what's going on inside you. And then you have this, instead of what you thought you would find out, which was this really little ugly self-saboteur demon that just wants to destroy you and make you not do things you're supposed to do, what you dug up was someone who is really, you know, some entity within you that really is looking out after you and wants to protect you from having your energy depleted and feeling like crap and, you know, those kinds of things. And so I want, but I want, but I want, but I want. Oh, I see, I want these two things. And then we do this thing where we change the but to an and. Recognize conflict. Change but to an and. Okay, so what would changing but to and sound like? All right, you kind of heard me do it with but. I'm going to do it with but a couple more times, and then I'm going to switch the middle word to and. All right, I want to make outreach calls because it will help me grow my business and be more successful, but I don't want to be faced with rejection and feel worthless. But I want to make outreach calls so I can be successful in my business. But I don't want to be faced with rejection and be depleted and feel worthless. But I want to make outreach calls. Now let's change it to an and. I want to make outreach calls, and I don't want to feel rejected and worthless. And I want to make outreach calls. And I don't want to feel rejected and worthless. And, so you see what's happening there? What happened? Somebody say.
It's hopeful.
Yeah, you're
Positive, you acknowledge it.
We just changed one word, and the whole equation in our brain changed from, oh my gosh, I'm in a quandary, to, as you said, hope. That gets you to hope, two H words, hope and how. As soon as your brain starts hearing the two sides and the and, your brain will go, huh, how can I have this and this? I want these both things. Your brain's programmed to go after what you want. I want to go out and make sales calls, and I don't want to feel rejected. Oh, there's that balloon tool now he was talking about. Maybe if I go through that, it'll help me feel better. What's another way? Oh, you know what? I can break it down into small steps because I've got this big, complicated project that we were talking about. And you know, what if I did a small step and then I celebrated that small step in some way? You know, that way I get my shoot of completion dopamine a little early. And then in smaller steps, yes.
Are you suggesting we should be saying this out loud to ourselves, or doing that dialogue back and forth? Is part of the repetition, or part of what you're suggesting is the repetition of saying it out loud is actually there's some other shift that's happening?
When people hear it out loud, they really shift. They hear the difference. I don't know if when you're doing it to yourself, by yourself, in your own home, you actually have to say it out loud to get the shift. You might be able to get the shift by writing it down. But a shift definitely occurs when you actually acknowledge that you're caught in a quandary, and you've got these two things, and there's a big but in between them, right? And then the whole idea is you change it to an and it's a very simple tool. It didn't come from me, actually, it came from Michael Stratford. That's how I got it. He probably got it from somewhere else.
Improv, it's big in improv.
It's big in improv, but it's a really, it really, he did it in a workshop that I was at, and it was like, wow, that's so powerful. It's just a simple thing, but it changes this feeling of being in a quandary and being stuck to feeling hopeful and immediately starting to think about how.
And puts you in control.
And it puts you in control. Good point.
It's just like that, when you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change.
Mm-hmm.
It's like some Sabbath.
Yeah, when you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. Absolutely. Absolutely. So then, once you've changed the but to an and you kind of move your mentality to hope and how, then you're in a position to actually make a deal with yourself. What I usually suggest is to be compassionate. So I'm going to say make a compassionate deal. The way I make compassionate deals with myself is I actually acknowledge when I'm feeling scared or anxious to do something. And I'll say, I am really scared to do this. I really don't want to do this. I can feel myself dragging. Sometimes I don't have the patience to do all of the introspective work, but I can jump to making a compassionate deal by, first of all, not beating myself up for having that resistance to it, just assuming positive intent, okay? If I'm scared and I'm dragging my feet, there's probably something painful about this. So things that I do is I make it easier. And example with exercise. So sometimes I get overwhelmed at exercise, but what I'll do is I'll say all I have to do is take the dog to a walk. I'll walk to that sign and back. You know, it's flat, it's less than a mile, it seems easy to me, and I say it'll only take 20 minutes. And when I say that, that's a compassionate deal. And there is that negative voice inside me that said, yeah, that's not real exercise, and that's not really going to get you anywhere, and all the negative voices. But if I really stick to, yeah, but I'm avoiding exercise for some reason, so I'm either going to do the short walk or I'm probably going to end up procrastinating and not doing anything. And if I can be compassionate with myself and assume positive intent, then I will go on a short walk. If I can't be compassionate with myself, I won't go on any walk at all, because then I'll be getting really angry, really upset at myself, and you know, I'll start feeling worthless and I'll crawl into bed and not do anything, right? So small little steps, and I've gotten myself to do all sorts of stuff that I was scared to do just by doing small little easy steps. YouTube videos is a good example. So I hated doing videos. And then I just said, well, just video it and throw it up. And the way I did it is I did the mental thing. I said, YouTube is a sea of people. I'm like, I would be one drop in the sea. I mean, who's going to watch the stupid video if it's boring, right? They're only going to watch it if it's interesting. So I can use it as practice. I can post a lot of videos up there. And so I posted a lot of videos, and a lot of them have one view, or, you know, and that was me checking it out. Some of them have 10 views, which were kind of people in the group. But there's a couple videos that I have up that have 25,000 views. So some of them were interesting, but I would have never done those if I hadn't done all the dorky ones, right? So I had to be willing to do dorky videos in order to get to the good ones. I had to be very compassionate with myself.
Heidi, can I add something that might
Yeah.
help on the fourth one?
Mm-hmm.
And it does come from improv, something I learned taking an improv class.
Mm-hmm.
But is a stopping word and is a connecting word.
Ooh, love it.
If you think about the buts in the sentence, you pay attention to what happens after the but. So you're gonna, and since this but is a stopping, you're probably gonna stop, or that's the one you're gonna notice. So whatever comes after the but is the thing that gets attention on it.
Oh, interesting.
And so you have to be careful about what you
Right.
put behind the but.
Yeah, and when I'm writing like business emails and stuff, if I have but in there, I rephrase it, because you basically are trained, like everything you say before but doesn't matter.
Right.
So your real intent is what's after the but.
Exactly.
And interesting how I said it. I want to make sales calls, but I don't want to feel worthless.
Right.
Yeah.
And when you flipped it,
Mm-hmm.
it did make a difference.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Isn't it interesting? Love it. And you said and was a connect.
And it's a fun little self-observation to count how many times, notice how many times you say but or and.
Mm-hmm.
Just in a day, give yourself or in an hour in a conversation.
Yeah. We need all these logs. I've been starting to use my phone as an observation log, so I can just write every little thing I observe about myself. Okay, so I said there were 7 steps. Number 5 is to make a compassionate deal with yourself. Number 6 is to acknowledge yourself positively. And number 7 is to go back, and in this case, it's to breathe. Sure. or 4. But just keep circling, because you're going to get yourself to take small steps. And we will have a session, and we've had sessions before on habits and routines. And one of the things that we do with things that we really don't like doing is we do what Karen brought up in the very beginning, is we turn them into little routines so they don't deplete our energy and they just become really automatic. So I always give as an example my laundry routine, and it's not as bad now, but when I had kids, there were more than 7 loads of laundry a week, and I just couldn't stand doing laundry on the weekend, and it would just pile up and pile up. And so I said to one day I did this thing where I was folding 1 load of laundry, and I thought, wow, it only takes me 10 minutes to fold a load of laundry and put it away, 1 load. So I said, what if I did 1 load of laundry every day? There's 7 loads in a week.
Yeah.
If I did 1 load of laundry a day, it would only take me, and I don't really hate putting it in the wash, because that doesn't take anything, and I don't really hate moving it from the wash to the dryer. What I hate is taking it out of the dryer and then folding up the clothes and putting it away. And that's the part that only takes 10 minutes. So the other thing I did is I said, well, I know that clothes get wrinkled in the dryer overnight, but for me, doing it in the morning as part of my morning routine when I'm not really quite awake yet or thinking, I'll work it into my morning routine. So what I would do is I would throw laundry in at night, throw it in the dryer overnight, pick it up in the morning as part of my morning routine, and I would fold and put away 1 load of laundry a night. And the only way I got myself to do it is say it takes 10 minutes. So that's an example of kind of working something into a routine and making it more automatic. So that could be one of your compassionate deals, right? Let's take it in steps. Okay, we're going to turn off the video now. So
The final thing I want to go over with you, just to reinforce before we end the class today, is to just go over that 7-step get into action process again. So here are the steps. 1, notice when you're procrastinating without judgment. So we talked about, isn't that interesting? Just notice. Acknowledge the positive intention behind the procrastination, which is usually how you're protecting yourself. Recognize the internal conflict and commit to protecting both interests. We talked about changing the but to an and in the class. Make a deal with yourself to take a small action. And I actually didn't write on the whiteboard taking the small action, but that's what I have in the 7 steps regardless, and that was implied on the board. So here I have step 5 being take the action. I think on the board I have something different, but the general gist and pattern of these steps is the exact same. You take the action, you acknowledge yourself for taking the action, and then you go back up here to 2, 3, or 4, and you just keep repeating the cycle so that you can take baby steps. So again, I want to thank you for taking the class. I hope you enjoyed this kind of integrated approach to capturing the class for you if you missed it. And we're not going to do this every time, but I thought this was such an important project that we should do it. And again, just to remind you, if you have any questions at all, you should not hesitate at all to reach out to me. The email address is nahid@coachnahid.com. And I look forward to hearing from you if you have any questions. Otherwise, thank you so much for being with us today. I hope you enjoyed the class, and go out and act.